Have you ever wondered what happens when the heavens fall in love with the earth? When a being of eternal silver and silent orbits finds solace in a place of soil, roots, and fleeting seasons. Tonight, we journey to a place beyond the reach of gods and mortals, to an orchard where time itself held its breath for a love story written in moonlight and sacrifice. So, find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and let the story of a humble healer and a lonely goddess unfold. Far above the reach of cities, temples, and the grand, indifferent designs of the gods, nestled on a quiet ledge in the ancient Pendis Mountains, there lived a healer named Andronikos. His home was an orchard more than a house, a sprawling, living sanctuary of gnarled fig trees, wild, stubborn pears, and silver-leafed olives that seemed to drink the starlight. Their roots, a tangled and intricate tapestry of wild thyme, mountain lavender, and resilient moss, clung to the mountainside with a fierce and quiet tenacity. At its heart stood a simple hut, half swallowed by patient vines and soft moss, a structure that seemed to have grown from the earth rather than been built upon it, its stones cool and damp with the mountain's own breath. Andronikos lived alone, but he was not a man acquainted with loneliness. He spoke to plants the way other men might speak to priests or kings, his voice a low murmur against the rustling leaves. His fingers, stained with the earth's secrets, knew the weight of dew on a petal, the hidden language of bark, the silent, aching sigh of roots seeking water deep within the stone. He was a man of the soil, not of temples. He had no use for myths that demanded worship without kindness, or for miracles that came at the price of fear. Here, in his high grove, the only gods were the ancient, listening trees and the whispering wind that carried tales from one peak to another. The only prayer was the slow, deliberate arc of his shadow moving between rows of blossoming branches as he worked from dawn until dusk. And he liked it that way. Pilgrims, their bodies bent with illness or their spirits heavy with heartbreak, sometimes found their way up the winding, treacherous goat trails to his grove. They came with faces etched by worry and hands trembling with unspoken fears, their hope a fragile, flickering candle against the vastness of the mountain. He would greet them not with words, but with a quiet nod of understanding, and lead them to a smooth, worn stone bench beneath a gnarled olive tree that was older than any story they knew. He would listen to their ailments, his gaze steady and calm, absorbing their pain without judgment. Then, he would move through his orchard, a silent collector of remedies, gathering the precise leaves, roots, and petals needed. He would offer them a tincture or a balm, his hands moving with a quiet certainty that was more reassuring than any divine promise. He never asked for coin, only for silence, a quiet, respectful exchange between a suffering soul and the healing soil. It was said that no god had stepped foot on that mountain in centuries. Whether from sacred distance, or a forgotten disdain, the divine had left the high grove untouched. There were no shrines slick with offerings, no relics imbued with hollow power, no priests chanting empty words. The land was pure in a way the rest of the world, with its clamoring cities and warring gods, had long forgotten. The seasons passed slowly on the mountain, each one a long, deep, and deliberate breath. Winters blanketed the orchard in a profound hush, a deep and settled quiet where the only sound was the soft, rhythmic fall of snow on sleeping branches. Springs came like a soft, hesitant applause, coaxing petals from their long hibernation in a gentle, unfolding wave of color and scent. Andronikos moved through them all with the unhurried patience of a stone, never imagining that anyone, or anything, could disturb the sacred, predictable rhythm of his world. One night, when the moon was full and the orchard was bathed in a light so intense it felt like liquid silver, he noticed something strange. The blossoms on the pear trees glowed with an unnatural luminescence, each petal seeming to hold a tiny, captured fragment of the moon itself. The ancient olives, usually stoic and still, seemed to lean not away from the wind, but towards something unseen, their silver leaves shimmering with a silent, expectant energy. When he stepped outside his hut, the air was still and cold, yet it was alive with a presence he could feel in his very bones, a hum of ancient power that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He saw her then. She was standing beneath a pomegranate tree, its dark leaves a stark contrast to her radiance. She was tall, pale as moon milk, her eyes the color of the sea just before the stars rise. She reached out a slender hand and touched a pear blossom. It didn't wilt or fall, it shivered with a life it had never known, a pulse of pure, divine light that spread from petal to branch. Andronikos forgot to breathe, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, because the mountain had been quiet for centuries, but the goddess of the moon, Selene, had finally come. Her arrival was not announced by trumpets or divine proclamations. One moment, the orchard was bathed in its familiar silver light. The next, she was there, a silent, luminous presence that commanded the very air to be still. She moved with a grace that humbled the ancient trees, her feet brushing the dew-soaked grass without a sound, her long, silver hair catching the starlight like a celestial net. Andronikos recognized her immediately, not because he had ever seen a goddess before, but because nothing else in the world could command the orchard to such reverent stillness. Not even the deepest winter could hush the trees the way she did. She moved slowly, her fingers tracing the delicate veins on a leaf, her gaze taking in the simple, earthly beauty with a sense of wonder, as if seeing it for the very first time. Where she lingered, life surged in a quiet, miraculous wave. A dormant fig tree bore sweet, dark fruit in the deep of night. A myrtle bush, long past its season, released a wave of intoxicating scent that filled the entire grove. The orchard, so long immune to the divine, responded as if it had been waiting for her touch since the dawn of time. That first night, no words were spoken. There were no offerings, no prayers, no demands. She simply sat among the peach trees until the first, faint hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, her gaze fixed not on the heavens she ruled, but on the mortal grove at her feet. As the stars faded, she vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of night-blooming jasmine and an orchard that felt changed, awakened, and forever marked by her presence. She returned with the next full moon, and then again, each visit a little longer, a little less hesitant than the last. Sometimes she would wander the orchard paths, a silent, shimmering mist of a figure. Other nights she would stand at the edge of the cliff, her back to the grove, watching the distant, silent stars as if trying to remember why she had ever cared for their cold, unchanging company. The orchard accepted her without question, and so did the healer. It was not a romance, not yet. It was an absence shared between two beings who had long existed on the lonely edges of other stories. One too divine to find rest among her own kind, the other too mortal to seek it beyond his grove. The gods, in their endless, self-absorbed dramas, did not notice she was gone. The moon still moved in the sky, a hollow echo of her power, and the tides still obeyed. But something ancient and fundamental had shifted. A goddess had found rest in a place the heavens had abandoned. The first time they touched, it was an accident born of an unspoken, shared sorrow. Selene was leaning against an old apricot tree, her usual ethereal glow dimmed by a celestial grief too vast and heavy for words. A sorrow that seemed to cling to her like the absolute cold of deep space. Andronikos, though only mortal, understood the shape of grief when he saw it. Without thinking, without conscious decision, he reached out, his warm, earth-stained fingers brushing against the back of her cool, pale hand. In that single, fleeting instant, a silent pulse flared between them, a profound silence that cut straight through the whisper of the wind. She pulled back sharply, her eyes wide not with fear, but with a terrible, dawning recognition. She had touched mortals before, poets who sang her praises, priests who built her temples, kings who begged for her favor, but never one like this, never in a place so untouched by Olympus, and never with such a devastating consequence. He stumbled back a step, a sharp breath catching in his chest. He did not bleed, did not cry out, but something inside him, a small, vital spark of his allotted time on earth, had been irrevocably given away, extinguished like a candle flame in a sudden draught. The orchard confirmed it. A handful of perfect, white petals, vibrant just a moment before, fell from a nearby branch, aging in an instant and turning to gray dust before they even reached the ground. Selene understood before he did, immortality does not mix with mortal vessels. Each touch, each moment of closeness, would quietly carve away a piece of his life, not stolen, but exchanged, a terrible, silent payment for a moment of shared warmth. And yet he said nothing. He returned to his work the next day, his movements now a fraction slower, his shoulders carrying a new, invisible weight. A new, aching silence grew between them, a space filled with what could not be said. Selene began to distance herself, a barrier of guilt and sorrow forming around her. She stopped sitting close, her hands folded tightly in her lap to avoid another accidental touch. When he offered her a ripe fig, she would let it rest on a stone between them before retrieving it. The silence stretched, taut and shimmering with unspoken pain. This was no ordinary love. It did not grow with time, it cost it. The silver sundial at the orchard's heart now cast two shadows, one dark and honest, the other pale and shifting like water. The second shadow grew longer and deeper with each of her visits, spilling across the orchard floor like a stain of ink. Her presence continued to change the orchard. Fruit grew sweeter overnight, and flowers long dormant opened in a riot of color. The grove pulsed faintly with her light, a constant, gentle thrum of divine energy. But it also changed him. Threads of silver, like captured moonlight, appeared in his dark hair at the temples. Fine lines, like a delicate, intricate map of the years he had not yet lived, etched themselves around his eyes. Each time their hands brushed over a shared cup of water or a fallen branch, a little more of his vitality ebbed away. He never spoke of the cost, accepting the slow, quiet surrender of his life as if each year were a seed he was planting in her care. Selene could not bear it. She, who had watched empires rise from dust and return to it, who had guided the tides and guarded the dreams of countless mortals, decided upon a rebellion born of love. She would still time itself. On a moonlit night she went to the orchard's silver sundial, the same one that had once marked harvests and equinoxes with its faithful shadow. She etched ancient, complex lunar runes into its surface, her fingers tracing patterns of power that had not been seen on Earth for millennia. She wove spells from threads of starlight and fragments of silence stolen from the forgotten hours between seconds. She called upon the void, the stillness that existed before creation, offering her own divine essence to slow the ever-turning, relentless wheel of time. The trees bent inward, their leaves rustling in a chorus of approval. The wind ceased, the birds fell silent on their branches, and the bees hung in the air as if caught in golden, honeyed light. The orchard had become a sanctuary outside of time, a perfect, unchanging moment. When she next touched his hand, her fingers lacing with his. Nothing was taken. For a while, they simply breathed in the perfect, absolute stillness. Time passed elsewhere. Cities rose and fell, empires cracked and crumbled, but within that sacred grove, nothing changed. No footsteps faded, no hair turned gray. Each night was the same length, each moonrise a perfect, flawless echo of the last. But cosmic order does not tolerate such defiance. Deep in the unseen folds of the sky, Kronos, the keeper of all moments, stirred from his contemplation. He who counted every breath, who marked the beginning and the end of every story, had noticed the missing minutes, the ragged wound torn in the seamless fabric of his perfect design. He did not arrive with thunder and lightning, but with a quiet, inevitable tightening of reality. The stillness shattered piece by piece, like a pane of glass struck by a stone. The wind returned in sharp, angry gusts that tore leaves from their branches. Flowers began to rot mid-bloom, their petals turning black and slimy. Fruit dropped from trees half-formed and bitter. Hours, days, years began to pour through Andronikos like a flood, the stolen time returning all at once with a vengeance. In a single night, a deep wrinkle formed on his brow, a joint in his hand stiffened with age, a cherished memory blurred at the edges. Then Kronos appeared. He stood tall and pale, dressed in the fabric of dusk and shadow, a long, heavy pendulum of polished obsidian swaying where his heart should be. His eyes were endless, spinning circles, every past and every future spinning silently within them. He did not address Selene at first. He looked at Andronikos, and in a single, cold blink, centuries of judgment passed. "This place is not yours to hold," Kronos said at last, his voice grinding like ancient, worn gears. "He was dying," Selene pleaded, stepping forward, her light a fragile shield against his darkness. "I gave him stillness. You gave him defiance," Kronos replied, his voice devoid of all emotion. "He touched a god. And there is always a price to be paid when a mortal dares to steal time from the god who owns it. The price had to be paid. The choice was simple and terrible, to be undone, or to be forgotten. To undo the act meant erasing their love, the orchard, the stillness. Andronikos would live on, his life restored, but he would never know why his days felt lighter, his heart heavier, his soul forever searching for something it could not name. To forget meant one of them would vanish from existence, their memory wiped from the world, beyond even the reach of myth. Andronikos, though weakened and terribly aged by the resumed flow of time, stepped forward, his legs trembling but his resolve firm. "I am mortal," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "My time is meant to end. Let it be me." But Kronos shook his head, a slow, final gesture. "Mortals do not choose in matters divine." Selene turned to Kronos and knelt, not in weakness, but with the ancient, solemn grace of a goddess accepting her fate. "I remember every lover who prayed to me," she said, her voice clear and steady, a single, perfect note in the crushing silence. "But I only loved one who never asked." She rose to her feet, her gaze meeting the timeless void in Kronos' eyes. "I will be the one forgotten." Kronos said nothing. He simply nodded once. And with that, the wind changed. The orchard shimmered, and the moon began to dim. It happened slowly, a gentle, heartbreaking fading. The moon did not fall from the sky. It simply withdrew, like a candle flame pulling back into its wax, growing smaller and paler until it was gone. Across the world, poets woke in confusion, their verses about the moon suddenly meaningless. Tides shifted without reason, crashing against shores in chaotic patterns. wolves howled at a sky that no longer answered with its familiar silver light. In the orchard, the change was absolute. The ethereal glow was gone. There were no halos on the trees, no shimmering dew on the petals. There was only the cold, indifferent light of the stars. Andronicos stood alone, but he remembered everything. That was the final, exquisite cruelty of Kronos, to leave him the memory of her, while erasing her from the memory of everything else. There were no songs of Selene now, no temples in her name, no prayers whispered at the full moon. Her name, once etched into marble and myth, was gone from the tongues of the world, but not from his heart. He wandered the orchard like a man tending a graveyard of starlight. Every tree was a relic, every shadow a hint of her presence. He found the faint impression of her footprints in the soft earth near the cliff's edge and built a small wall of stones around them so they would never be disturbed. He placed a single, smooth, silver stone where the sundial had stood, though it no longer cast a shadow. Years passed, but time no longer moved in a straight line for him. Seasons turned, but without urgency or meaning. The grove was alive, but quieter, like a room holding its breath after a funeral. The land itself held a memory, even if the gods did not. Some nights, a fig tree would bloom out of season, or a single, perfect white flower would open in the dark without explanation. These were her echoes. She had not been erased, only hidden. Then one night, after many, many seasons had passed, a ripple of memory moved through the ancient roots of the trees. The air grew still and cold with a familiar power. Andronicos, now an old man with hair as white as snow and eyes that had seen too much, stepped out into the grove. He looked up. Above him, where there had been only the black, stardusted void for so long, a sliver of silver light appeared. A crescent, pale and shy, but undeniably her. The moon had returned, not as the goddess who walked the earth, but as a rhythm, a constant, silent watcher who had carved herself back into the sky. Not to defy Kronos, but to endure him. To remember. The orchard remains. Years, then decades, then centuries passed. Empires rose and fell in the valleys below, their great deeds and terrible wars turning to dust, but high on the mountain, something stayed the same. Travelers speak of it in hushed tones, calling it Selene's orchard, though none remember who Selene was. They say a soft, silver light can sometimes be seen between the branches, even on the darkest nights, and that the wind hums with a voice that speaks not in words, but in memory. It is a place that does not demand prayers, only remembrance. A place that whispers of a love that never truly left, and still, quietly, blooms in the moonlight. There are places in the world that have slipped from the grasp of the sun. Cities that live in a perpetual twilight, their stories told not in the bright light of day, but in the soft, forgiving glow of gas lamps. Tonight, our story takes us to one such place, to a city of eternal dusk, and to a toymaker who had forgotten the meaning of joy, until a child with winter in her eyes walked through his door. In a valley carved by a forgotten river, nestled so deep between ancient, slumbering mountains that the sun could only ever manage to kiss its highest peaks, lay the city of Oakhaven. It was a city of cobblestones, slick with a near-constant mist, and rooftops that huddled together like old friends sharing a secret. Oakhaven did not know dawn or high noon. It lived its life in a gentle, unending twilight, the sky a permanent canvas of soft purples and deep indigos. The only true light came from the gas lamps that lined its winding streets, each one hissing a soft, lonely song into the quiet air. On a street named Sparrowthorn Alley, where the mist hung thickest, stood a small, unassuming shop. Its windows were clouded with the dust of ages, and a simple wooden sign, so weathered that the words were nearly gone, hung above the door. It read Cale's Mechanical Marvels and Wooden Wonders. But no one in Oakhaven called it that. They simply called it the Toymaker's shop. Its owner was a man named Cale, and he was as weathered and quiet as the sign above his door. He was old, with hands gnarled like the roots of an ancient oak, yet those hands could perform miracles with wood. He was not merely a toymaker. He was a vessel for memories, a craftsman of sorrow. His shop was not a place of business, but a mausoleum of forgotten joys. The air inside was thick with the scent of sawdust, wood glue, and something else, the faint, sweet smell of grief. Each toy on his dusty shelves was a masterpiece of melancholy. There was a wooden soldier that, when wounded, would not march, but would lift a hand to its face as if wiping away a tear. There was a music box that played a tune so heartbreakingly beautiful it could make the stones of the city weep. There was a spinning top that, instead of dancing with joy, would wobble and fall as if exhausted by the effort of existence. Cale did not carve toys, he carved feelings. Each creation was a vessel for a piece of a memory he could no longer bear to hold himself, the memory of a daughter he had lost to a winter fever many, many dusks ago. Her laughter was a ghost in the workshop, her absence the silent engine that drove his hands. He rarely sold his creations. The children of Oakhaven, who were as quiet and somber as the city itself, would press their faces to his window, their breath fogging the glass, but they knew not to enter. The toys were not for playing. They were for remembering. One afternoon, as the twilight deepened and the lamplighter made his slow, methodical rounds, the small bell above Cale's door chimed. It was a sound so rare that Cale, hunched over his workbench, flinched as if struck. He looked up, his eyes adjusting from the intricate work in his hands. Standing in the doorway was a slip of a girl, no older than his own daughter would have been. She was pale, with hair the color of winter sunlight and eyes that held the deep, quiet gray of a cloudy sky. She was wrapped in a simple, threadbare coat, and a small, dry cough escaped her lips, a sound as delicate and brittle as a falling leaf. She said nothing. Her gaze drifted over the shelves, past the weeping soldier and the sorrowful music box, until it landed on an object on Cale's own workbench. It was a bird, carved from a single piece of pale willow wood. It was unfinished. Its wings were exquisitely detailed, each feather a testament to the craftsman's skill, but its head was smooth and featureless, its eyes not yet carved. It was a thing of immense potential, frozen in a state of incompletion. Cale had started it the week his daughter had fallen ill and had not touched it since. It was a monument to a hope that had died. The girl pointed a small, thin finger. "That one," she whispered, her voice as soft as the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the window. Cale felt a strange, protective anger rise in him. "It is not for sale," he said, his voice a low growl, rusty from disuse. "None of this is." The girl did not flinch. She simply nodded, her solemn gray eyes never leaving the bird. Then, as silently as she had arrived, she turned and left, the bell chiming her departure. Cale expected that to be the end of it. But the next day, at the exact same hour, the bell chimed again. She was there, standing in the same spot, her gaze fixed on the unfinished bird. She did not speak, only watched, her presence a quiet, unassuming question in the silent workshop. After a time, she coughed her small, dry cough and left. This became their ritual. Every day, she would appear. She never asked for anything, never tried to touch the toys. She would simply stand and watch him work, her attention always returning to the willow bird. Cale, against his will, found himself growing accustomed to her presence. The silence in the workshop felt different with her in it, less like an absence, and more like a shared quiet. He began to speak to her, not in greeting, but in fragments, telling the stories of the toys as he worked. "This one," he murmured one afternoon, sanding the arm of a miniature ballerina, "is for the memory of a dance in the city square, before the mist grew so thick." Another day, holding a tiny wooden horse, he whispered, "This one is for the sound of hooves on cobblestone, a sound you no longer hear in Oakhaven." The girl, whose name he learned was Elara, would listen, her head tilted slightly. She rarely spoke, but her eyes understood. He noticed the deepening shadows under those eyes, the persistent, dry cough that seemed to shake her small frame more each day. He found himself leaving a small cup of warm, herbal tea on a stool near the door for her, a healer's habit he thought he had long forgotten. One day, after she had left, Cale looked at the unfinished bird. For the first time in years, he did not see it as a symbol of his failure and his grief. He saw it through her eyes. He saw the promise in its outstretched wings, the song waiting in its uncarved throat. He picked it up, the willow wood smooth and cool against his calloused skin. He blew away a decade's worth of dust. His hands, which had only known how to carve sorrow, trembled as they reached for his finest knife. He did not know why, but he knew with a certainty that resonated deep in his weary soul that he had to finish this bird. And he had to finish it for her. He worked with a focus he hadn't known in decades. The workshop, once a silent tomb of memory, became a sanctuary of quiet creation. The rhythmic scrape of his knife against the willow wood was the only sound, a steady heartbeat in the dusty air. He was no longer carving sorrow. He was shaping a promise. For the bird's eyes, he did not carve the hollow, vacant look of his other creations. He spent a full day shaping them to hold a sense of gentle curiosity, the kind of gaze that looks forward, not back. He sanded the wings until they were impossibly smooth, feeling not like wood, but like the very idea of a feather, ready to catch a current of air that did not exist in Oakhaven. As he worked, Elara continued her daily vigil. But Cale, his senses now sharpened by purpose, could see the subtle, cruel progression of her illness. The pallor of her skin was no longer just pale. It was becoming translucent, as if she were slowly fading into the city's mist. Her small, dry cough was deeper now, a sound that seemed to echo in the hollows of his own chest. She leaned against the doorframe for support, her small frame trembling with a weariness that no child should ever know. The unspoken race against time settled upon Cale's shoulders, a weight far heavier than his grief had ever been. He began working after the lamplighter had passed, his old eyes straining in the flickering gaslight, his gnarled fingers moving with a desperate, youthful urgency. The shavings of willow wood piled up around his feet like fallen snow. He was pouring everything he had left into this single creation, his skill, his memories, his newfound fragile hope. He was not just building a toy. He was trying to build a fortress against the encroaching winter in Elara's eyes. Finally, one afternoon, as the purple twilight outside bled into a deeper shade of violet, he was finished. He set the bird down on a square of velvet cloth. It was perfect. It was more than perfect. It was alive. The grain of the willow wood seemed to flow like feathers, and the small, dark eyes he had carved from ebony seemed to hold a spark of intelligent light. The bird was not posed for flight, nor was it at rest. It was in the moment just before song, its head tilted, its throat arched, ready to release a note of pure, unburdened joy into the silent world. It felt warm to the touch, as if a tiny, living heart beat within its wooden chest. He looked up as the bell chimed. Elara stood in the doorway, her breathing shallow. She looked at the finished bird, and for the first time, a faint, fleeting smile touched her lips. It was a smile of recognition, as if she were seeing an old friend she had been waiting for. Cale picked up the bird, his hands trembling slightly. He crossed the room, his footsteps loud in the expectant silence, and knelt before her. He did not have the words for the storm of feeling in his heart, the hope, the fear, the terrible, aching tenderness. "I finished it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For you, Elara." He placed the willow bird into her small, cold hands. The moment her fingers closed around it, a soft, golden light began to emanate from the wood. It was not the harsh, demanding light of the sun, but a gentle, warm glow, like a candle shielded from the wind. The light grew, filling the dusty shop, pushing back the shadows, and wrapping Elara in its embrace. Her persistent, painful cough ceased. The deep, weary lines of pain on her face softened. She closed her eyes, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. She did not get better. She did not stand up, her lungs suddenly clear and strong. Instead, she began to fade. Her form became transparent, the edges of her threadbare coat dissolving into motes of golden light. She was not dying, she was transforming, letting go of her pain, her sickness, her weary little body. The light pulsed once, bright and warm, and then it was gone. And so was she. Cale was alone again, kneeling on the cold stone floor. But the air in the shop was different. It was not empty. It was light. The heavy, suffocating blanket of grief that had smothered him for years had been lifted. On the floor where Elara had stood, there was nothing but a single, small, white feather. Then he heard it. A sound Oakhaven had not heard in living memory. From the workbench, the willow bird tilted its head, and from its carved throat, a note of music poured forth. It was a sound of impossible beauty, a melody of pure, clear joy that climbed and soared, filling every corner of the workshop. The bird flexed its wooden wings, and with a soft, rustling sound, it lifted into the air. It circled Cale's head once, it sung a clear, liquid farewell, and then flew straight through the closed door, leaving not a mark, and out into the misty twilight of Sparrowthorn Alley. From that day on, Oakhaven was changed. The mist did not vanish, and the sun did not break through the clouds. But every morning, the song of a single, unseen bird would echo through the cobblestone streets, a melody so hopeful it seemed to coax the gas lamps to burn a little brighter. Sometimes the citizens would look up and swear they saw a flash of gold in the perpetual twilight sky. The air, once heavy with a collective, unspoken sorrow, now held a note of quiet promise. Cale's shop changed too. He carefully swept away the years of dust. He packed away the weeping soldier and the sorrowful music box, placing them gently in a chest like old friends being laid to rest. And he began to carve again. But now, his hands, freed from the grip of his own grief, moved with a new purpose. He carved a spinning top that danced with wild abandon. He carved a smiling doll with eyes that sparkled with mischief. He carved a wooden horse that looked ready to gallop through fields of sunlit grass. The bell above his door began to chime more often. The children of Oakhaven, drawn by the new lightness in the air, would now step inside, their quiet awe turning to gentle smiles. Cale, the Toymaker who had once carved only memories of sorrow, now spent his days carving wonders of quiet joy, his work lit by the warm gaslight, his heart forever attuned to the sound of a willow bird's song, echoing softly through the city of eternal dusk. Every life is a story, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Most are written only in the fragile ink of memory. But what if you were to find a book that was writing your story for you? A volume that knew every secret you held, every path you had taken, and every step you had yet to take. Our final story tonight is about a man who spent his life preserving the stories of others, only to find himself trapped within his own. In the heart of a city forgotten by time stood the Great Library of Altheim. It was not merely a building that contained books. It was a cathedral of paper and ink, a labyrinth of corridors lined with shelves that stretched up into a gloom so profound that the ceilings were a matter of faith, not sight. The air itself was a tangible presence, thick with the scent of aging parchment, dry leather, and the faint, sweet perfume of decaying knowledge. Silence was the library's native tongue, a deep, hushed quiet broken only by the whisper of a turning page or the sigh of settling dust. Its guardian, and for all intents and purposes its only living resident, was a man named Elias Thorne. He was the head archivist, a title that sounded grand but meant, in reality, that he was the chief custodian of silence, the high priest of dust. He was a small, stooped man, with eyes the color of faded ink and fingers permanently stained with the residue of his trade. His life was a study in quiet precision. His footsteps made no sound on the marble floors. His every movement was a slow, methodical ritual, from the winding of the grand clock in the entrance hall to the careful cataloguing of scrolls that had not been read in 1,000 years. Elias did not see the library as a collection of individual books. He saw it as a single, breathing entity, and he was one of its vital, if insignificant, organs. He felt he was not a character in any of the grand adventures or tragic romances that lined the shelves around him. He was merely a footnote, a brief, unread entry in the library's own long and complex history. And for most of his life, he had been content with that. One evening, while making his rounds in a wing of the library he had not visited in years, the Chamber of Lost Tongues, he noticed something out of place. Tucked between two enormous, crumbling tomes was a book of modest size. It was its appearance that stopped him. It was bound not in leather or cloth, but in something smoother, paler, with the faint, unsettling texture of cured skin. It was utterly seamless, with no title on its spine or cover. In the center of the front cover was a small, intricate lock of silver, but it had no keyhole. Curiosity, a feeling Elias had not truly felt in decades, stirred within him. He took the book. It was strangely warm to the touch, and it seemed to absorb the silence around it. He carried it back through the winding, shadowy corridors to his small, lamplit study high in the central spire. He set it down on his heavy oak desk, the sound of its placement unnaturally loud in the stillness. With a gentle, practiced touch he tried the lock. It sprang open beneath his fingers as if it had been waiting for him. He opened the cover. The pages were blank. They were made of a vellum so fine and white it seemed to hum with a faint, inner light. There was not a single mark, not a blot of ink, not a scribe's stray guideline. A wave of disappointment, sharp and unexpected, washed over him. It was just an empty journal, a forgotten, unused thing. He sighed, the sound small in the vastness of his study, and left the book open on his desk as he went to prepare his simple evening meal. When he returned an hour later, something had changed. The lamplight fell across the open book, and he could see, there on the first page, a line of script. His heart gave a painful lurch. No one had been in the room. He approached the desk slowly, his breath held tight in his chest. The script was elegant, precise, and chillingly familiar. It was his own handwriting. He read the first sentence, his mind refusing to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. Elias Thorne was born on a rain-swept morning in the year of the Azure Comet, the only son of a baker and a seamstress. He sank into his chair, his legs suddenly weak. He read on, his trembling finger tracing the impossible words. The book recounted his earliest memories with a clarity he himself did not possess. The specific taste of his mother's honey cakes, the feel of a wooden splinter he'd gotten in his thumb at the age of 5, the overwhelming awe he'd felt the first time his father had brought him to the Great Library. It was all there. Every quiet joy, every secret, childish sorrow, every lonely afternoon spent in the company of books instead of friends. A strange and powerful feeling began to bloom within him, pushing aside the initial fear. For his entire life, he had felt invisible, his existence a quiet, unobserved passage of time. But this book had seen it all. It was a testament, a validation. His life, which he had always considered to be a story too small and too quiet to ever be told, was being written. He became consumed. His duties, once the unshakable bedrock of his existence, were forgotten. He did not make his rounds. The grand clock went unwound. He sat at his desk, day and night, reading the story of himself as it flowed from some unseen, impossible quill onto the pages. The narrative moved through his apprenticeship, his quiet dedication, his slow, steady rise to the position of head archivist. It chronicled decades of solitude, of a life lived between the lines of other people's stories. The book's narrative was catching up to his own timeline. He read of the previous evening, of his walk through the chamber of lost tongues, of his discovery of a strange, skin-bound book. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if he were an echo reading about his own source. His eyes scanned the final lines on the page, his heart hammering against his ribs. He took the book to his study, his curiosity a flickering candle in the vast darkness of the library. He opened it to find it empty, and with a sigh of disappointment, left it on his desk. When he returned, he found that his own story had begun to write itself. He sat, and he began to read. He read all through the night and into the next day, his world shrinking to the confines of the lamplit desk, his soul captured by the impossible, undeniable truth of the words on the page. And as the last of the evening light faded from the high, arched window, he sat there still, his heart a frantic drum, reading the very words that were now appearing on the page before him. A cold, paralyzing fear, unlike any quiet dread he had ever known, seized him. He was no longer a reader discovering his past. He was a prisoner watching the bars of his cage being forged in real time. The validation he had felt just hours before curdled into a profound horror. The book had not just seen his life, it was dictating it. He was a puppet, and the elegant script on the page was pulling his strings. He had to break the loop. He had to prove the book wrong. With a surge of desperate rebellion, he decided to act. He would do something simple, something unpredictable. I will stand up, he thought, his mind screaming the command at his body. I will close the book and walk away. He focused all his will on the muscles in his legs, trying to force them to move, to push his chair back from the desk. But before he could even tense a muscle, his eyes were drawn back to the page. New words were flowing from the invisible quill, the ink still glistening wetly in the lamplight. A desperate, rebellious thought sparked within him. He would stand. He would defy the narrative. He marshaled all his will, a tiny, flickering flame against a hurricane, but his body would not obey. The weight of his own story, now written, was an anchor he could not lift. He remained seated, a prisoner of the page, his gaze locked on the words that confirmed his own powerlessness. A choked sob escaped his lips. The book hadn't just predicted his thought, it had recorded his failure before he had even had a chance to fail. He was trapped not by chains, but by prose. His own life story was a cage from which there was no escape. He tried again, a different tactic. He would spill the inkwell. A chaotic, meaningless act. He reached his hand out, his fingers trembling, towards the small glass pot. But his arm felt impossibly heavy, as if moving through thick, viscous water. And on the page, the script continued its merciless, placid narration. His next thought was one of chaos. He would spill the ink, mar the pages, disrupt the flow. But his hand, the very hand that had tended to these sacred texts for a lifetime, refused the act of desecration. It froze, hovering over the desk, a testament to a lifetime of reverence that he could not, even now, betray. It was over. His rebellion, so fierce and bright in his mind, was nothing. He slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a vast, empty resignation. He was not the author, not even the character. He was merely the reader. He watched as the book continued to write, its narrative moving past the present moment and into the future. It did not foretell grand adventures or terrible tragedies. It foretold the quiet, unchanging rhythm of his life. It wrote of how he would sit for another hour, how he would then rise, his joints aching, and make his way to his small cot in the adjoining room. It described the dreamless sleep he would have. And so it was. His life unfolded exactly as the book dictated. Every day, he would wake, and his first act would be to go to the desk and read the day's pages. He would read of his solitary meals, of his slow, methodical work in the archives, of the specific books he would reshelve, of the way the dust motes danced in the afternoon light. He lived his life first in text, and then in reality. The quiet contentment he had once found in his routine was gone, replaced by the weary obligation of an actor playing a part he could not escape. Years passed. The ink on his fingers was matched by the ink on the pages. The book chronicled his slow decline, the stoop in his back growing more pronounced, his steps becoming slower, his breath shorter. It wrote of the day his eyesight began to fail, and the cruel irony of having to hold his own life story closer and closer to his face to be able to read it. He never tried to defy it again. What was the point? His story was written. One evening, he came to the desk, his body frail, his movements slow. He opened the book, and saw that he was approaching the final pages. The script was as elegant as ever as it described his final day. It wrote of how he would feel a weariness deep in his bones, a final, peaceful letting go. It wrote of how he would sit in his chair, his gaze drifting from the page to the high, arched window, watching the last of the twilight fade from the sky. It wrote of how his breathing would slow, becoming as soft and quiet as a turning page. It wrote of how his heart, after a lifetime of steady, lonely beats, would finally, gently be still. And as Elias Thorne, the head archivist, the quiet guardian of a million other stories, took his last soft breath, his head resting on the open pages, a final sentence appeared on the vellum, the ink shimmering for a moment before drying forever. And then, the story of Elias Thorne was complete. With a soft, leathery sigh, the book closed itself. The silver lock clicked shut. And in the Great Library of Altheim, the profound, eternal silence returned. Every life is a story, filled with quiet moments, unspoken feelings, and chapters we never expected to read. The tales we shared tonight are just a few from the infinite library of human experience. If these stories have brought you a moment of peace in the quiet of the night, consider leaving a like to let us know you were here with us. And for every story, there is a question. What makes a life, even a quiet one, a story worth telling? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. To ensure you don't miss the next chapter in our collection, we hope you'll subscribe and join our small, quiet library of sleepyheads. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with wonderful stories.